Welcome to the presentation of a lecture from Gnostic Radio, a free public service from the Gnostic tradition of Samael Aun Weor. Gnosis is the root wisdom of all the world's great religions. Gnosis is a universal teaching of practical science, whose goal is absolute liberation from suffering and the complete development of the human being. This lecture is one of hundreds available as free downloads, podcasts, or transcriptions. Our lectures range in topic and complexity in order to address the many needs of humanity. We invite you to browse our library of lectures to find teachings that suit you. Each Saturday, Gnostic Radio broadcasts live and includes a free online classroom allowing listeners to see images, read related scriptures, and ask questions of the speaker. To learn how to participate, visit gnosticradio.org. Gnostic Radio is a service of Glorian Publishing, a non-profit organization. The lectures and radio broadcast have been made possible by the financial support of listeners like you. Most spiritual schools recommend a donation of $10 to $20 per lecture. To make a donation, visit gnosticradio.org. Now, with heartfelt wishes for the end of suffering for all creatures, we begin the lecture. May all beings be happy.
We live upon death. What we call life is really just a feeding upon death. It's strange that in this era we have a powerful aversion to the notion of death, to the concept or idea of death, or to even the reality, to the presence of death. We avoid it. Not only do we avoid it in our environment, but we avoid it in our minds. But the fact is that we depend upon death to be alive. Everything in manifested nature works in cycles. So if you imagine a great wheel that's always in motion, we depend upon that wheel from moment to moment. Contemplate the last meal that you ate. Imagine that. Remember that meal. Whatever it was, without exception, that meal was a result of death. Every single piece of food that you have ever consumed came to you because of death. Even as a vegetarian, you kill to live. Everything that lives, lives on death. Death is the nourishment for life. When we eat a meal, we consume the bodies of elementals or organisms that are in nature. Even when we drink water, that is a process of destruction, of death. When we eat plants, vegetables, salad, we have killed the bodies of those plants in order to eat them, to consume them. And when we eat an animal, meat, fish, we have killed to live. And it's odd in this era that we have separated ourselves from that process of death so much. But now there are many people who cannot even imagine killing for food. They want someone else to do it for them. And yet, anytime we eat, we accrue the karma, the cause and effect relationship of that killing. So even those who think that they are avoiding killing avoiding the process of another creature dying, participate in that death every time they eat. It is unavoidable. This is why we find that certain groups and spiritual teachings in the world have gone far extreme in their misunderstanding of the nature of life and death, in their endeavor to avoid killing. They don't understand that in order to live, they must kill. Not in excess, and not as a matter of abuse or for pleasure, but to live. Every meal is an act of killing. Yet we must live. We must eat. Thus we must kill. So we have to learn how to manage death with respect, with balance, so that the karma, or the cause and effect of that killing, is in harmony. Every action is karma, cause and effect. We must act. We shouldn't be afraid of karma or afraid of action. What we should be afraid of is action that is out of balance, that isn't harmonious with nature. To eat and to be eaten is the law of nature. Life and death are how nature works on every level. Death is a part of living. And to live, one must have death. It is also very odd that in this era we find a great predisposition to avoid death to such an extreme that we want to find a way for our physical bodies to live forever, to extend our lifespans to such a degree that we would never have to die. And there are many people who have this goal. And there are many organizations and companies who are spending millions of dollars to find a way to make us, quote, immortal. It's absurd. It demonstrates this extremity of avoiding the reality of death and a profound ignorance. Their craving for pleasure, for comfort and security is so great that they avoid the reality of death. And the fundamental axis of this is ignorance. There are three factors in what I just explained. Three elements that are very critical for us to grasp. These three elements are at the basis of all suffering. Ignorance, craving, and aversion. And the basis of Hinduism and Buddhism, these are the mulaklisha, the three roots or the causes upon which the wheel of suffering spins. These are the axle. If you've ever heard of the gankil, it's a symbol in Buddhism that represents three forces in motion. Whoops. And it looks like a wheel with three parts, like a yin-yang, but with three parts. Gankil represents how the three forces create. There are three forces in every form of creation and every form of destruction. The law of three creates and destroys. The law of three is the fundamental basis of everything that moves, whether it moves positive or negative, whether it moves up or down. Every movement is determined by three factors. For ignorance, for suffering, for pain, for delusion to grow, to expand, these three forces must act. Psychologically in us, they are these three: ignorance, craving, and aversion. They are the basis of all suffering. When it comes to the topic of death, these three are very much active in us. Ignorance in Sanskrit is avidya, which means without cognizance. Vidya is knowledge, but not just intellectual knowledge. Vidya means cognizant knowledge, knowledge that's in the consciousness, knowledge that you never forget even after you die, knowledge that is part of the soul. Avidya means without that kind of knowledge. That's what we have. We have a lot of avidya. And we demonstrate it constantly in our profound ignorance in dealing with everything, and especially in dealing with ourselves. Because this ignorance is so pervasive in us, we have a fundamental problem in which we are grasping at or craving, clinging to a mistaken notion, a very sophisticated and complicated concept, which is a sense of self. This craving or grasping in us, in the example I'm giving, is to grasp at life, to grasp at this, what we call life now. And that grasping or craving is rooted in a fundamental ignorance, which is that what we feel and believe and see is what we are. We think we are our name, we are our memories, we are this body. And all of that is wrong. It is all mistaken. We have a very deeply mistaken sense of I. And because we grasp at that I, we avoid anything that contradicts it. You see how these three work together? We avoid anything that contradicts our sense of self. This false sense of self that has our name, our face, our language, our culture, our accent, our beliefs, all of that. Death contradicts that. The very idea that this self can die terrifies that sense of self. This is why we avoid the topic of death. You see, this whole interlocking axiom of three factors is mistaken. It's a delusion. And the way that one stops its motion and thereby stops the production of suffering is through knowledge, through vidya, which is cognizant knowledge, real knowledge. That type of knowledge can only be acquired in a very specific way. And that's why we're here, to learn that. So to contradict this whole cycle of three, we need vidya in Sanskrit, which is gnosis. Knowledge, cognizant knowledge. But gnosis is not what we read in books. It isn't what we hear in lectures. It isn't what we believe. It is knowledge that we derive through our experience in relation with the soul. Gnosis is cognizant spiritual knowledge, knowledge of the soul, not the personality, the name, our face, our history, what schools we've gone to, what books we've read. None of that has any importance unless it penetrates into the soul and becomes a permanent part of that soul. These three fundamental faces or aspects are really one thing, which is a movement of energy that's constantly at play in our psychological country, in our minds. This becomes important for us because all suffering is rooted in this. Every form of suffering that exists emerges out of the interplay of these three aspects: ignorance, craving, and aversion. These three are symbolized in many ways and have many names in every religion. They have many characteristics and qualities because they are very deep and profound. When we look at ignorance or craving or aversion, don't think that these are superficial concepts. They aren't. These are like gravity. They're actually deeper than gravity. They're very deep and profound aspects of psychological energy. They cannot be overcome through the intellect. Just because you've heard the terms, or you've studied this before, or you've learned it already, doesn't mean you've overcome it. If you're suffering, if you're stuck here without real knowledge of the soul, it's because these three are still in motion. And the reality is, we only conquer fully these three sources of suffering once we have fully left the wheel of samsara, which means one has to have become a resurrected master. That's very rare. What I'm saying is, even the gods suffer from these three. Even the Buddhas in nirvana have craving to remain as Buddhas, to have their powers, to have followers. Even the Buddhas in nirvana, the angels, have ignorance because they still do not see the ultimate nature of self, which is the absolute, the emptiness. And they still have aversion because they want to avoid that which is unpleasant and stay always in pleasure. So don't think that these three are easy to get past. They aren't. This is why we study the tree of life. This map illustrates the laws in nature and the relative density of different realms of nature. And as energy or light flows from the absolute, the emptiness, that light passes through ever-increasing levels of density or complicated laws. These laws and forces and energies are all psychological. They are matter and energy, but they are also psyche. They are mind. Everything in nature is mind, condensed, materialized. When we finally arrive to studying the physical level, which is called Malkut in Kabbalah, it's the 10th Sephiroth, we see that it's between two realms. The superior realms related with the heavens, and the inferior realms related with the hells. Every great tradition throughout history has tried to symbolize and represent these two fundamental aspects of life and death: heaven and hell. And unfortunately, because we've lacked knowledge, our own ignorance has caused us to misinterpret and misunderstand these teachings about heaven and hell, such that we've arrived at the foolish belief that heaven is a place up in the clouds and hell is a place below the surface of the earth, and we'll go to one or the other depending on what we believe. This is so illogical and contradictory, it's absurd, and yet millions of people believe it. It contradicts every law of nature. It contradicts how energy and matter interact with each other. And it contradicts all of the scriptures. No scripture states that we go to heaven because we believe in heaven. And no scripture states that we go to hell because we don't believe in heaven. what every scripture states, whether it's Buddhist, Hindu, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, they all state the same thing. We go where we belong. We go according to what is in our mind. We go depending on who we are. Jesus explained it very explicitly throughout the Gospels. He never said, if you believe in me, you will go to heaven. What he said is, it is a very narrow path to go to heaven. Very difficult, and very few enter it. No idolater, no murderer, no adulterer, no fornicator, no thief can go. And we have all of those factors in ourselves. We have ignorance that craves pleasure and avoids pain. And because of that, we commit crimes. We commit them physically, we commit them emotionally, we commit them mentally. And every time we engage in a mistaken use of energy and matter, we encode that mistake. We crystallize it. You see, what this tree of life illustrates for us is a flow of energy. The Ein Sof Or, the ray of creation, descends down the tree of life and creates everything. That ray, that light, is in us. Our own particular light that passes through us. It is the energy that lets us be here and now. It is the energy of living. But we modify that energy according to our actions, according to our thoughts, according to our feelings. In other words, into this Gankil, this circle that's spinning with three aspects, there's always energy flowing. That circle or Gankil represents our mind, our heart, our body. Three aspects, three brains. That Gankil shows us our psyche. Three brains. Some people say body, speech, and mind. This is also accurate. In this tradition in Gnosis, we talk about intellect, emotion, and body, or motor brain. This diagram shows the three brains divided as 5 centers, because really the body has 3 separate aspects that we study when we get more detailed. But on this graphic we see yellow, blue, and red. These are the 3 parts of the Gankil. Energy is flowing into our 3 brains constantly, in every motion. Every moment, there's energy. And our use of that energy determines who we are, what we will be, what will happen to us, where we're headed. This is why we study this topic of death. As we act, as we think, as we feel, we are determining our future. If we're using our energy and are unaware of ignorance, craving, and aversion in ourselves, then when that energy flows through our 5 senses, we engage with what we perceive around us and what we perceive within us. And the ignorance and craving and aversion cause us to misinterpret, to mistake, to have wrong view, to see things through the illusion of ignorance and craving and aversion. So instead of seeing what's actually there, we only see what supports our sense of self and what does not support it. In other words, we're constantly in this effort to fortify the false sense of self that we have. In everything that we do. If we have a sense of self that feels with a certain sense of pride, a certain sense of accomplishment, we feel that we are a good worker at our job. We will look in every moment, in every engagement with others, in every situation, for ways to support that, to fortify that. And anything that contradicts it, we avoid. We do our best to not see it, to not deal with it, or to repress it, to fight against it. So if it comes that we may have made a mistake, something we may have done wrong, we'll do our best to hide it, not only from others, but from ourselves. We'll do our best to avoid it. But if there's something where we've done something good, something that was beneficial, we indulge in it. We revel in it. And in both cases, we're using energy, circling around ignorance, craving, and aversion. The result is that in that scene, in that engagement, there was no penetration to the truth of the matter. There's only pride or shame, attachment to image, and this desire to propagate or support this sense of self that we've been carrying around. If you've ever been out of work, unemployed, if you've ever had someone break off a relationship with you, whether a friendship or a romantic relation, then you felt the blows to pride. And you felt the impulse to find something else to boost your pride. And if you've ever felt praised, celebrated, envied, then you felt the boosts to pride. And how much we want to indulge in that and engage in that. And most of us think there's nothing wrong with that. We feel it's good. We don't see the danger or the harm. The danger and the harm is precisely in the ignorance. Every time we feed the energy of these types of engagements, we deepen the ignorance that causes us to suffer. Because we're failing to see the true nature of our identity. For that, we need to go a little deeper and understand what this means. Our psychology is not what we think it is. And this is the effect of the ignorance that afflicts us. What we think is ourselves, what we think is me, is fundamentally mistaken. The first aspect of this that we need to study is what we call in this tradition the essence. This is unfiltered, unmodified consciousness. Consciousness is simply the ability to perceive. It is perception, but not through any particular sense. We have perception here in our physical bodies, which flows through our five senses. But that perception has a root that's far beyond the physical body. Nonetheless, when we're here in a physical body, we have the ability to perceive. But in us, that perception is modified. It is modified by ignorance, craving, and aversion. It is modified by pride, by anger, by lust, by gluttony, by fear. By all the psychological elements that surge in our mind stream. The other names for this essence, there are many, in every tradition there are many names for this. But of importance, I want to point out some Sanskrit words, Buddhata and Tathagatakarbha. These words translate to essentially the same thing, which is Buddha nature. If you've studied Buddhism, you've heard about the Buddha nature. Buddha nature is the capacity to become a Buddha or to become an angel. It is that part of us that is a seed or an embryo that can be grown, that can be nourished and developed. In us, it is not developed. It is weak. We need to understand what this is, not intellectually and not by belief, but in the moment now, in every moment. We need to experience what the essence is. Without that experience, you can never understand Gnosis or any religion. It's impossible. Every religion in the world is focused on developing the essence. At least its original purpose was that. Nowadays, most of them have degenerated and have other purposes, such as to sustain themselves, to have power, money, respect, whatever it is that they're after. But the original goal of the founders of all religions was to teach us how to use the essence, how to grow it. This is the most fundamental thing that you can get from studying Gnosis. How to understand, how to experience, and how to use your own essence. This means consciousness that is unmodified, pure, free, no cages. It perceives accurately. It perceives without filters. It perceives without limitation. This is why we learn many techniques in order to teach ourselves about the essence. We start with self-observation and self-remembering. We can also call this watchfulness, cognizance, consciousness, self-awareness. There are many names. You might have heard the term mindfulness, but we use that term in a more specific way than general perception. The essence is our direct connection with truth. The essence is our consciousness, which is a spark of soul from our inner being, from our inner God. That is the truth, the reality. Our inner Buddha can work in us, can help us, can aid us through that essence, that spark of free consciousness. That is the only pure part remaining in us. Nothing else in us is pure. Everything else in us has been modified, afflicted by ignorance, craving, aversion, pride, fear, gluttony, lust, envy, laziness, many elements. This is why it's so important for us to understand what the essence is. Unfortunately, most of our essence is trapped. It has become modified in that sense of self, the I. In Latin, I is ego. In modern English, we use ego in weird ways. But in this tradition in Gnosis, we use ego in a very specific way. It means I. And that sense of I, that sense of me, that we all experience is a lie. It is false. That feeling of pride, that feeling of self-sufficiency, that feeling of shame, that feeling of doubt, all of those are I. Ego. In Christianity and in Western traditions in general, the I or ego is talked about as the 7 deadly sins. pride, anger, lust, gluttony, etc. That is symbolic. The 7 aspects or 7 egos are symbolic. The egos themselves are much more complex and sophisticated and complicated than just 7. And this can be learned very quickly when you really sincerely observe yourself. You'll discover that what some people might call pride is much more complicated than mere pride. Because it's mixed with fear, it's mixed with anger, it's mixed with lust. The ego is complicated. The mind is complicated. The essence is simple. This is the difference. In other traditions, the ego is called by different names. In Buddhism and Hinduism, it's called kleshas or skandhas. These are psychological elements that trap or modify consciousness. In other words, when you feel anger, when anger takes over you, and you're an angry person, that is a klesha, a skandha. It is a cage, or you could also say a samskara in Sanskrit terms. It is a modification of consciousness. In other words, the consciousness has become trapped in a cage called anger. And that anger only wants pain. Reflect on that. Next time you feel angry or irritated, look at that anger in yourself and question it. Is this anger a reflection of God? Is it a reflection of divinity? Or is it a reflection of desire? What does it want? Anger wants pain. Anger is pain. When we're angry, we suffer. We make others suffer. Yet we defend our anger rigorously. When we get angry, we don't want to let it go. Because when we get angry, we're also very proud. Anger is arrogant, always. Very strong sense of I in every anger. And anger is also afraid of anything that will undermine it or take it away or contradict it. Anger does not want to see the truth. We can get very angry, but if it suddenly becomes evident that it's really our fault, anger doesn't want to see that. The pride of anger is afraid of seeing that truth. So you see, it's hard to simplify an ego to one name. You can't. You have to see the ego for what it is, not put a label. Most of our essence is trapped in ego. Most of it. The ego is very complex, and it's different with all of us, because every element in the ego was made by us through our mistaken actions. In other words, if in a given moment that energy is moving through your 3 brains, and you see something that you want, in other words, in your ignorance you forget your real nature, your innermost, and you feel a craving for something, to have something. That energy that's flowing through you becomes crystallized in that desire, and that forms an ego. And over time, the more you feed that desire, the stronger it gets. This is true of superficial things and very deep things. Even if it's something like craving approval or acceptance, craving security. It doesn't have to just be craving food or craving sex, although those also have the same result. Each time that energy flows through that desire and becomes crystallized, that is a karma. Cause and effect. And that consciousness becomes trapped in that ego. That means any time that ego emerges in our mind stream, the consciousness that is inside of it perceives through that filter. When we become angry, we see everything through that anger. Everything. When we become enraged with lust, we see everything through that lust. When fear takes over, or doubt, we see everything through that doubt or fear. It's modified consciousness. It is a form of ignorance. And all of these produce suffering and deepen suffering. So we see a very strong difference between these two. The essence is pure, it is joyful, it is serene, it is at peace, it needs nothing. Unmodified consciousness is perfect serenity, harmony, love. If you've ever observed a child, not a child when they're suffering from being in a body, but a child that is fully relaxed, happy, and will just give love to anyone, will share with anyone, that is essence. And all of us have that. But unfortunately, when we were growing up, the ego started to incorporate, and we lost touch with it. This is why Jesus said we have to have the mind of a child to enter the kingdom of heaven. That mind is the essence. It is pure. It is free. It isn't bitter. It isn't grim. People nowadays have an aura or a characteristic of a lot of sarcasm, a lot of bitterness, a lot of tension and stress, tightness. The essence doesn't have any of that. That isn't our essence. The essence is like that child. Bright, wide-opened eyes. Everything is astonishing. Everything is beautiful. Everything is amazing. That is how the essence sees. So the work of the Gnostic student who's preparing for death is to engage and activate this essence all the time. All the time. Because death can come at any moment. And if you face death with the essence active, you won't be discouraged. You won't be afraid. You won't be bitter. You won't be grasping at or craving for anything but God, but more light. Your pride won't be in the way, your anger, your lust, your fear. Not even pain will be an obstacle. And you will face death with joy, with knowledge. These two aspects of our psyche have an intermediary that they work through, and we call it the personality. The word personality is also from Latin, persona, which means mask. And that's what the personality is. It's a mask. The personality is developed in time. When we are born, we start to make a personality. And throughout our lifetime, we use it in order to engage with life. It is our mask, our face. It has our name, our history, our memories, our language, our culture, most of which we think is ourselves. But let's talk about that for a minute. We tend to think that our personality is our identity, but it is not. We get confused. Even many Gnostic students get confused. And they call aspects of the personality ego. They are not. The personality is temporary. When the physical body dies, the personality goes with it. We don't keep a personality in our next existence. There are many people who think they go to heaven and they keep the same name and the same face You don't. In each existence, you have a new face, a new body, and a new personality. We explained in the previous lecture that energy does not die, and our consciousness is energy. And that consciousness has been migrating from body to body for uncountable ages. And in every body, we have had a new personality. Reflect on this. The personalities that we have made now in the 21st century would be completely out of place 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. Your personality now that likes to eat hamburgers and watch TV and click around on the internet would go mad 500 years ago. No one would understand a word you say because the language you use now has nothing to do with the language of 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago. Even the way people look is different. Look through the visual record of humanity. Our faces have changed. Our bodies have changed. We can even tell now, looking at a face, what decade or era they came from. Over time, the bodies change, the personalities change. Personality is temporary. When I was meditating on this, trying to understand it deeper and find ways to explain it, I was given a beautiful example. The personality is really just an instrument. Think about that. What is an instrument? It's just a tool. And we've explained that before in lectures, that the personality is a tool. And what uses that tool is either the essence or the ego. Most of the time, it's the ego. But if you reflect deeper on this, it can make more sense and help you understand the difference and start to discriminate in yourself the difference between ego, essence, and personality. If you listen to music, you'll see the exact same phenomena that's happening in us psychologically. The instrument is like the personality. The music is using the instrument, right? You can play the same song on any instrument, and it will sound different. And some of us like certain instruments better than others. Just in the same way, we like certain personalities better than others. But every one of us is an instrument. Our personality produces a note, a sound. What matters is, what is the music flowing through our instrument, psychologically? What is the sound that we produce? Is it the sound of ego, of desire, of craving, of aversion, of ignorance? Or is it the sound of the divine playing through us? This is the difference. And if you think about personality, ego, and essence in that way, it can become much easier to see it in yourself. So personality is just a mask through which energy flows. We've become very much attached to personality and make it very strong. In the past, it was not this way. Nowadays, we put a lot of energy into our country, our heritage, our race, our language, and we build a lot of pride around that. We get attached to a certain religion, either because of our family history or because of something we've discovered in this existence. And we build a lot of pride. And we make our personality a reflection of that religion. So nowadays we see trends or tendencies amongst groups to have the same types of personalities. If you go to a Christian church, you'll find that everyone there starts to behave like everyone else. They use the same words. They'll even dress the same. They'll talk the same. They'll eat the same things. They'll go to the same places. They'll listen to the same music. They may even start driving the same cars. That's all personality. It's all temporary. It's all based in time. The same is true if you go to any Gnostic school. They'll all start talking about the same things, believing the same things, dressing the same way, eating the same foods. That's all personality. You go from city to city, and you find the same thing. In Chicago, there are cultural tendencies. In New York, there are cultural tendencies. In Delhi, in Rio de Janeiro. There are cultural tendencies that are all related with personality. The mask. None of them are real. Our language does the same thing. It's constantly changing. New terms. New words. And to be hip or to be cool, you always have to be using the newest words and terms. That's all personality. It's not real. This is significant. It sounds silly, but it's very significant. Because every use of energy has an impact in us. We have become so addicted to personality that we've lost touch with the ability to have the consciousness active through us. We've become hypnotized. So what's working through our personality most of the time are just desires. To be accepted, to have security, either financially or emotionally. To feed our desires, whatever they may be. Why does this matter? Because at the moment of death, your psychological state determines what will happen to you. This is why it matters. And none of us know when we're going to die. If we're surprised by death, if it comes upon us as a shock, which it will, if we're not prepared, our psychological state will determine how we pass through that door and determine where we go and what becomes of us. This is why it's important for us to learn to discriminate between these different psychological elements. And this is why we study the tree of life and all the laws of nature. The ego belongs in the lower realms of nature because the ego is very complicated. Pride is not simple. Lust is not simple. Envy is very complicated. And all of these factors reside in our own subconsciousness, which, in Christian terms, is hell. It is below. This means that every time we, in every moment, use energy to feed personality, to feed ego, we deepen the ties that bind us to the lower worlds, to the lowest, deepest, hidden aspects of our psyche. This means that when we die, that's where we go. We're already there. So the question becomes, for us, who dies? Who dies and what happens when we die? This graphic shows the interplay of all these different energies. On the far left, we see the exterior worlds, everything outside of us that we interact with. And in order for us to interact with it, we use a personality. The way we dress, the way we walk, the way we talk, the way we present ourselves. That is our personality. And all the energy and impressions of life flow through that personality into our three brains. and is processed. What's happening in our three brains, in our mind, in our heart, and in our impulses? We don't know. We're not cognizant of that. But all of that is happening here in Malkuth, between the heavens and the hells, psychologically. So as those energies are flowing into us, there is an engagement that happens psychologically in us between what is outside and what is inside. Our will determines the result. Do you see the three forces at work here? Exterior, interior, willpower, consciousness. Most of the time, our willpower is completely rooted in desire, craving, aversion, and ignorance. So whatever's flowing into us, we just react based on our desires, our sense of self, our pride, our envy, our desire, our lust. So when we see somebody wearing something that we really like, we want that. That's envy. Why do we want that? To feed our pride. To make our personality more attractive. To make people like us. To get acceptance. To get admiration. Or also to be envied. We want to be envied the same way we're envying the other person. What's happening there is that energy is flowing into us, feeding and nourishing envy, pride, fear, all a mistaken sense of self. And that mistaken sense of self is getting stronger. So, if this has been the case with us today, and yesterday, and last week, and last month, and last year, then it's probably the case with us in our previous existence also. We have no evidence to show that at any other time have we been different. Thus, logically, mathematically, it makes sense that the conditioned consciousness in us is very robust. And the liberated or free consciousness in us is practically non-existent. And we can find supportive evidence for that if we look at society. If we look at our lives. It's very difficult to find selfless love. It's very difficult to find true serenity. Someone that's truly happy and has no clinging, no attachment, no longing, no desire. They are just serene. That is a sign of liberated consciousness. It's very difficult to find in ourselves real happiness for others. Unattached. Usually when we're happy for others, we feel resentment also. Yeah, I'm happy for you, but man, I wish I got that. Why can't I have that too? Envy, resentment, pride. It's very rare for us to find chastity, sexual purity, in ourselves or outside of ourselves. So it's very rare to see liberated consciousness, and yet everyone thinks they know what it is. There are tens of thousands of books in the bookstores about the liberated consciousness and about the coming golden age. How do they know about that? Upon what evidence? Or upon what basis do we see a coming golden age for humanity, like all of the spiritual groups are claiming? Many groups claim that we're about to become super spiritual. Based on what? By the anger that we're growing every day? By the war and violence we're spreading every day? How is that going to take us to greater heights of spirituality? What about in our own lives? How is lust going to take us to the state of being an angel, a Buddha? Angels, Buddhas, and masters don't have lust or anger. They have other issues, but they don't have the animal egos that we have. This is the vital question for a Gnostic. This relationship. It's determined completely by a presence of consciousness. In other words, if you want to have some influence over what happens to you when you die, start preparing right now by having an influence over the energy that passes through you. That's what will determine what happens when you die, your state. If you can learn to have your essence present, this means that you are very aware of your three brains. You're aware that thoughts are there or not there. You're aware of what's happening with your psychological mood, your emotion. And you're aware of what's happening with impulses in your body. And yet, that awareness is not identified, not attached. It is not craving or avoiding. It observes and then acts according to knowledge, not ignorance. This means when impressions come from the exterior world or impressions come from the interior world, the consciousness, who is present and active, can respond with harmony, with knowledge. Not knowledge from the world, but knowledge of Gnosis, knowledge from God. Intuitive knowledge, to know what is right and to do it. That kind of knowledge is not written in any book. It comes in the moment, through intuition, through superior aspects of the three brains. This means if we see something outside of us that's disturbing, something that we want or something that we don't want, if the consciousness is managing the three brains, that impression is transformed. The consciousness says, oh, I see that. And my ego feels the tendency to want it and wants to take over my three brains to get that. But I, as a consciousness, relax. And don't react. And just observe. And listen to see the real answer. From the heart. Intuition. What is the right response? For example, you're having an argument. And someone that you love dearly accuses you of something that penetrates straight into your heart. And that pain blossoms there. In most cases, we would react immediately because emotional impressions are extremely difficult to transform. And we would react with the same response, anger, and try to hurt that person the same way they just hurt us. So we start throwing back words to hurt them, to get revenge. That's how we would normally respond. If you've trained to have consciousness active in that moment, when those words come, you won't be surprised. Because to be trained in this way means that the consciousness is constantly watching. Like the goalie in sports, watching for that ball. At any instant, that ball can come, so you have to constantly watch. Nothing should ever surprise you. And that, when those words come, the person says those hurtful words, they pass through you like smoke. like air. No pain. Because the consciousness doesn't have pride. It doesn't have anger. What it has is love. And when the consciousness receives that impression and sees the person that you love angry and throwing those words, you will feel love for them. You will feel concern for them. You will realize, this person I love is suffering. I must have done something to hurt them, or someone did. Whether it's their own ego hurting them, or me hurting them, or someone else, what can I do to help them? Instead of reacting with anger and pride, craving and aversion, we react with love. Isn't that what we want? Isn't that the purpose of religion? That is what all of this boils down to. These diagrams and terms and charts might look complicated. Really, they're not. When you put it into action in your life, it's very simple. It comes down to this. Pay attention. Always. That pure attention, pure perception, unmodified, is consciousness. But you have to gauge in yourself. Because when we start learning this, it takes time to start to get the taste of what real consciousness is. Many people learn, quote, self-observation, but it's really a behavior of the personality. They don't really learn to observe with the consciousness. Many people build an ego of pride or of shame that they feel is self-observation. It is not. This is not something anyone else can teach you. You have to learn it yourself, the taste of it, the feeling of it, the experience of it. And what will show you when it's real is an example like I just gave you. Cause and effect. Don't lie to yourself. Be sincere. Be honest. The future of your soul is at stake. That's how important it is. Your future. A future of gradual work upwards to have a liberated consciousness, or a future descending into more and more conditioned consciousness, more suffering. The difference is right here and now. We're determining that trajectory. So learn the difference between ego, essence, and personality. That's what's going to make the difference and determine what happens when you die. So on that note, let's explain something quickly, and then we'll end the lecture. The question is, finally, who dies? We've studied ego, essence, and personality in us. So when we die, who dies? We know the physical body dies, and I already mentioned that the personality goes with that. It dies also. What happens to the ego and the essence? These are energies that are in motion, that can't be destroyed by physical death. So when our physical body dies, these two are enmeshed with each other. The essence is trapped in the ego. The trajectory of that cause and effect energy is what determines where we go. So who dies? Personality dies, the body dies. But the ego and the essence are projected onwards because of karma, cause and effect. So that depends on us. What are the causes that we've put into motion? We will receive those effects without question. If we are projecting through our actions every day a stream of pride, a stream of envy, a stream of lust, that is what we will reap. So the question is for us, what do we want? If we want to be liberated from suffering, we have to start right now, liberating ourselves from suffering. Pride, anger, envy, lust, gluttony, greed, laziness. To be prepared for death has these two fundamental parts. It's self-cognizance and work on the ego. You can't succeed without those in motion. There are many groups that teach you how to be self-observant, how to be self-cognizant, how to pay attention and be present in the moment. That's great. If they don't teach you how to work on the ego, you're not going to get anywhere. You need both. On the other hand, if people teach you how to work on the ego, but they don't teach you how to be present, you also can't get far. Because those constant processes of being asleep and not aware, you're creating more ego. So the two have to work in harmony with each other. Any questions? Please.
Why is the ego often related with animality? Do animals have ego?
In us, we have humanoid bodies. So our evolutionary progression has passed through the lower kingdoms, including the animal kingdom. The mind that we have was developed there. Humanoids are what we call intellectual animals. We're just animals with intellect. So our mind is an animal mind. Instinctive. Filled with all the qualities of animals. That's why. The ego is animal in us. It is all the animal characteristics. We have to eliminate that and become human. Which means to conquer the animal part and remove it and develop the human part. A real human being is a master. A real human being is an angel or a Buddha. We're only with the potential for that. We're not human beings yet. We're just animals who have a sense of self. And if you look at our behavior, you can see that. We're not really... Actually, in many ways, we're worse than animals. Most animals still respect the laws of nature. We don't. Most animals don't pollute their own nest or destroy their own food supply, and we do. So, another question? I saw another hand back there.
Yeah, you said we shouldn't self-observe to the personality because all my years of work. Now, the ego works through the personality, right?
Well, the essence also can work through the personality.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my prejudice of my personality, of culture, or whatever, right? Now, how am I not looking at that in terms of when I'm reflecting? Like the ego is working through my prejudice, right? And my personality, say I'm a Christian or Muslim, whatever it is, right? Now, this prejudice that takes over this personality, right? So where's the separation, really, of...
I'm not sure I fully understand your question, but maybe I didn't explain something well in the lecture, which is that when the essence is engaged and active, it uses the personality as its mask, as its instrument to engage with the world. But in the case of the essence using the personality becomes passive. It's no longer as active. When the ego's using it, the personality becomes very big and fat and is full of all of the cultural characteristics that the personality is engaged with. But on the other hand, when the essence is active, that personality becomes very passive. Does that make sense to you? In the case of self-observation, when the essence is activated and engaged, it observes the personality and uses the personality, but consciously. So then the language, the culture, and all of that serves as a vehicle to express the being inside, to express divinity. still uses personality. Eventually, that personality has to be destroyed. And that's what happens in the final stages of a great master expressing themselves. But I don't think I addressed your question, though. What exactly is your question?
Well, it's because we have to see what the mistake was, right? Through this personality, that we don't repeat it.
Mm-mm.
I mean, to me, that's where the work is.
Well, the difference is this. The personality is temporary, related with time. The important work is not on the personality, it's on the ego. Personality is going to die, no matter what. So I would suggest, rather than focusing on working on the personality, work on the ego, on what drives the personality.
That's labeling. That's just saying, okay.
No, it's not. It's very different.
Let me see what pride is.
No, it's not labeling. It's different. Again, personality is related with cultural characteristics. You know, our cultural tastes. And the ego is what drives that. So there is a distinction between the two. It may be that in many cases we start with analyzing the personality in order to find the ego that's driving it. That's perfectly valid. And in a lot of cases you'll need that. I'm not saying to avoid or disregard the personality. You need to be aware of it. But I've observed a certain tendency in some groups or teachers to focus so much on personality that they don't work on the underlying causes. And that can be the problem. And the example of that would be, in certain groups, you'll get involved with a spiritual group. And there's all this effort on, you can't dress a certain way, you can't eat a certain way, you can't talk a certain way. So all the students change their personalities. And then they feel like, oh, I'm doing good now. Because I'm not eating those foods I'm not supposed to eat. And I'm wearing white clothes all the time like I'm supposed to wear. And I'm talking the way I'm supposed to, and I'm standing and, being very gentlemanly or ladylike all the time, and they think that's progress, and it isn't. It's just personality. And that can be very deceptive. It can deceive you into thinking, well, I'm doing good now. Right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Question?
We receive emotional impressions so quickly. When someone insults us, we feel it immediately. How do we catch it in time? Because it almost feels like a millisecond that we feel the pain or the hurt or the ego. Pain almost comes so immediately.
Yeah,
So
the impressions are transformed through these 5 centers or 3 brains very rapidly. And the emotions, one of the hardest. It just takes an extended period of training and also to have the consciousness very strong. I've given examples in other lectures that you might remember. But the consciousness has the capacity to perceive without the interference of time. It sounds contradictory, but what can happen is when the essence is fully engaged and active, you can perceive the impression before it arrives. It sounds weird, but it happens, and it can happen if you're trained. And it can also happen in very strong experiences, like near-death experiences or very traumatic experiences, where time changes shape. Time slows down. The basic point is, if you're there and prepared, you'll just do your best. With emotional impressions, it's extremely difficult. Very difficult. So that's why in the beginning, we usually start working with the intellect. We all think the intellect is really fast, but it's actually the slowest of the 3 brains. So that's why we work with thoughts, working on thought, working on concept, working there to start calming the mind, slowing the mind, developing some serenity, because we're going to need that serenity to deal with the more difficult issues of lust and emotion, which are much faster and much more powerful than intellect. So just train, be patient. Little by little, we start to gain experience. Any other questions? Yes?
Yeah, I guess wondering about how, as a culture, we're kind of living longer physically, but tend to be people are losing their mind, dementia, or Alzheimer's. Or at one moment you'll be interacting with the person who you've known, and then sometimes the person will be there, but they don't remember themselves or who they were. And it it's not the person that you know, or I wonder, like, is it the personality starting to die, or the ego is beginning, those aggregates are beginning to leave the physical vehicle or something like that? I don't know if that any.
In cases of dementia?
Yeah, in Alzheimer's. I wonder if any
Alzheimer's?
about that kind of process
Yeah.
that's occurring there.
The process of dementia and Alzheimer's is very similar to what happens in a schizophrenic and other types of mental disabilities. What happens there is that the personality becomes fractured. It becomes dislocated. And if that psychological trauma deepens, even the mental body itself can become dislocated. And what happens then, more specifically in the case of schizophrenia, which is a much more pronounced result, is that the person, the physical body, is just the vessel through which all the egos start to express, without the personality being there much at all. And that's why you can be dealing with a person who has either multiple personality disorder, schizophrenia, or dementia, or Alzheimer's, and they seem to be a different person from event to event, moment to moment, day to day. They change. They have totally different way of expressing, different language. They don't remember things, and that's because the essence is not there. What's there is ego, which is all the different modified parts of essence. And every ego has its own will, its own memories, its own desires. And the personality being fractured can't contain it. That mask or that vessel is broken. And it's more pronounced when that psychological trauma has also dislocated the mental body. And in that case, there's clairvoyance. Even the vital body can be dislocated because that's related with personality. So that person who's experiencing dementia or schizophrenia starts to actually perceive their own infernal worlds. They're engaging with and talking to projections of their mind, effigies, egos, mental representations. So they'll start talking to people that you don't see. So if you ever see a person walking on the street talking to themselves, it may not be that they're on a cell phone. They could be talking to a projection of their mind, an ego, an effigy, even an elemental force. It's complicated. So the personality is important in that way because it's a mask or a vessel that helps contain all of the psychological forces. If that becomes broken, very difficult for a person to do this kind of work. Maybe impossible. Question?
How does the physiology of the brain affect ego and personality? Like, we know that there are chemicals in the brain that affect mood, things like that. If parts of the brain get damaged, we're not the same anymore. So how does that tie into the energetic types of like ego and personality?
Brain chemistry is interdependent with our psychological condition. They're interdependent with each other, meaning that they influence each other. If we have a strong ego of a type of psychological trauma like anger, that strong ego, especially if we've been feeding it a lot through our personality, can begin to create in us what doctors now call depression. Really, depression is repressed anger in most cases. But that depression, when that ego is inhabiting the body and controlling the three brains, changes the brain chemistry and causes the brain to not produce certain substances that are needed in order for the neurons to function in the right way. And that starts a cycle that degenerates and can lead to other disorders like bipolar, which can lead to other disorders like schizophrenia. So there's a trajectory here, just like I've been explaining. It's interdependent. So in some cases, there are medications or spiritual practices that can help alleviate the physiological part. But if you don't work on the psychological part, you will never fix it. So a lot of the medications that are used nowadays for these psychological problems stupefy the person so that they no longer have the ability to be conscious or cognizant of themselves, and it puts them into a kind of catatonic state. It's sort of like a psychological Band-Aid, but it doesn't solve anything. The only solution for these types of psychological problems is to get at the root, the anger, the pride, whatever it is that's produced that depression or the other characteristics. And brain chemistry is involved with many psychological elements. I just give depression as one example. Was there a question back there?
Yeah. Is there virtues in the personality that overlap within the essence? That when we die, we will not die with the personality? And is desire Lucifer?
Virtues that we develop, if they're real virtues, always belong to the soul. They can express through the personality. And if a person, when they're growing up, when they're young, has the training or the environment within which those virtues can express, then that personality can form as a vehicle for those virtues. But that depends on the karma. It depends on the person. If you've got, in your consciousness in the past, you've developed this virtue of chastity. Let's say you in the past were part of a religious group and you worked on chastity. And you were born into this existence. Your environment, determined by karma, would have to allow that chastity to continue. And if it doesn't, your personality will form in a different way, and the environment will form in a way that chastity will be contradicted. But if you're born in a good environment, that chastity can influence the development of the personality and help you. Depends on your karma. The second question is about desire. Is desire Lucifer? No. Lucifer uses desire. Lucifer is a psychological trainer. Lucifer itself, the name means bearer of light. Lucifer is energy, is an intelligence. But to train us to fix our problems, Lucifer uses desire through temptation in order to teach us about suffering. Usually we fail. But Lucifer is not the same thing as desire. Is there another question?
Yes. Is it possible to view your other past incarnations' personalities to gain knowledge? Or is there any real knowledge to be had by doing this exercise?
Yeah, you can learn about your past personalities. Whether or not there's any real knowledge to be gained from that depends on how you transform the impression. I think in most cases that if any of us were to meditate and find out about our past personalities, we'd probably build a lot of pride or shame instead of transforming that impression for real knowledge. So it seems to me that many students are helped by their innermost and given knowledge about past existences, but without knowledge about personalities. So we might learn about events, we might learn about psychological tendencies that we developed in past existences, but I think in some cases the being does not show us our past personalities purposefully. It depends. It depends on the person. Of course, in the case of Samael and Viora, he learned about many of his past existences and those personalities because he had to learn about the karmas involved in all of them. And any of us who are sincere will reach that stage. The point I'm trying to make is don't be too fascinated with personalities because they all fade away and die. What matters is the quality of your soul. Question?
Yeah, I wanted to know if when you're experiencing certain emotions like anger or irritability, and like you analyze why you are experiencing them, whether it's a certain trigger or you find out the causes for that, and so you try and avoid those causes or avoid those triggers, remove yourself from those certain environments that you know will set a certain emotion off.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that avoidance is instead strengthening those egos, or should you face those triggers and environments to truly conquer?
That's a great question. It's inevitable in every student's process of developing these skills that you have to learn to measure the resistance of your experiences. You have to learn to measure what you can handle and take on what you can handle. But there's a very fine line to balance here. So for example, if you've discovered in yourself, like you mentioned, certain triggers that provoke negative states in yourself, it can be useful to avoid those states or avoid the triggers until the time that you're prepared to transform them and handle them. But there's a fine line because we can start to avoid it simply because we don't want to deal with it. So if you're going to avoid a psychological trigger, make sure you're meditating on that trigger so you can comprehend it, because then you won't have to avoid it anymore. When you really comprehend it, it won't affect you. The other side is some people will start to indulge in them, to go after those psychological triggers to provoke themselves. And they say, well, I'm a Gnostic. I need this trigger for my ego so I can work on myself. It's foolish. They're, instead of avoiding, they're indulging. So it's this craving and aversion phenomena is happening there. The answer is to learn to measure resistance. And the way you do this is explained in The Revolution of the Dialectic by Samael Aun Weor. What he explains in synthesis is, when you have a goal, you need to analyze that goal, but you need to determine what the resistance to you is going to be, and you need to find a way to overcome that. The overcoming it will always come down to one thing: knowledge. Cognizant knowledge, not ignorance. This means that you have to meditate and you have to comprehend that. And it takes time, especially if it's a strong trigger. It can take time. The other thing that's important to remember here is that Lucifer, who's the one who's managing the karma to teach us and train us, will always give us things that we don't want to deal with. Always. It's the nature of the work. So when you're doing this type of work, you have to become accustomed to dealing with it. Not avoiding, not indulging, just dealing with it, accepting it, transforming it. Sometimes you'll fail. In fact, a lot. You'll fail a lot. But don't give up. Don't avoid it. Don't indulge in it. Accept things as they are and meditate a lot. And little by little you get a cadence or a kind of rhythm where, yeah, things are painful, things, you're suffering, you're hurting, you're always dealing with a lot of bitterness in your life, but you're starting to comprehend things, and that's what matters. So there's a psychological balance that has to be achieved, and it's not easy to get there. Be patient. Yeah. There was a question here? Yeah.
Is part of the personality inherited?
Is part of the personality inherited? Yes, absolutely. We've talked about this in other lectures, and Master Samael talks about it many times. The personality is pretty much determined by karma. So yeah, it's inherited in that sense. It's inherited also in the sense that you are acquiring a lot of characteristics from your family, from your country, from your culture, from your language. But inheritance also comes from your past existence. There are influences in personality with that, very deep. So yeah, good question. There was another hand I saw. Yeah.
How do you deal with strong personalities and group personalities? Like, let's say you got a music artist, and his big thing is to sag his pants and spit. So you have all of America copying this guy, and so now everyone's sagging and spitting music. How do you deal with that?
Well, I agree that one of the main things that's happening nowadays is the influence of strong personalities through culture. It's become much more powerful than it ever has been. And we're seeing that with many things: music, movies, TV, all kinds of influences that are coming at us. And the way you deal with it is you comprehend. You have to see those things for what they are. And that's why we study these elements: ego, essence, and personality. When you see behaviors, we have to analyze it, whether it's the behavior of another person or our own behavior. And analyze it with the goal: is this behavior related with the essence, related with God, or not? And then it comes down to what you want. If you want social acceptance and cultural acceptance, then you can go right along with that personality influence and you'll be accepted in society. But I don't know if the God's going to accept you for behaving that way, you know, in the sense that I don't know that you'll achieve the goals of spirituality.
Well, in that sense, I'm thinking of using personality the right way. Like a lot of times, if that kind of personality is coming towards me, I'll go, okay, here's my personality. You deal with it. I don't want to, have anything to do with that type of personality or that group. So I'm like, okay, well, let my personality go work with them. I don't know.
Right.
If that's the right way of doing things.
Well, I would say that we need to make a distinction between avoidance or aversion and discrimination. Discrimination is different. We have the tendency to avoid things that are unpleasant. But as a spiritual practitioner or someone who's aspiring to spiritual development, we need to develop a lot of discrimination, which means that we need to learn how to choose the influences that are acting on us. And what I mean by that is, let's say, for example, you have a job where you have to deal with a lot of unpleasant situations, and that's just your job. Well, you may just have to deal with that. That may just be something you have to deal with. But, for example, if you've got friends who invite you to go out, then you need to discriminate. Are these friends going to be a good influence or a bad influence? Or what about choosing a book to read or music to listen to or a show to watch? These types of things, we need discrimination. Is this beneficial or is it harmful? And let's not confuse aversion with discrimination. So I'll point that out firstly. That has to be very clear. Certain things we just have to deal with. So I think in the context of your question, apply discrimination to that. You don't have to go and do a lot of things that you do. A lot of us do things because we feel socially obligated, or we're obligated to family. And we don't want to, my whole family is going to do this thing, and I don't want to do it because I know it's going to be bad for me, but I feel like I have to go. No, you don't. You don't have to go. Or, say, for example, your whole family is going to eat pork, and you know you shouldn't eat pork. You don't have to eat it. They might all get mad. So what? So that's discrimination, not avoidance. Yeah. Was there another question back there?
Yeah.
Okay.
What is the difference between Buddhist psychology and Gnostic psychology? And is Sikhism compatible with Gnosticism?
So the question is, what's the difference between Buddhist psychology and Gnostic psychology? And is Sikhism compatible with Gnosis? In their essence, all three of these traditions are the same tradition. There is no fundamental difference between Buddhist psychology, Sikhism, or Gnosticism. They are all, in essence, the same. There are some differences in terminology, and if you look at certain schools of Buddhism or Sikhism, you might find things that appear contradictory. But if you study them with consciousness and put them into practice, you'll find that they are exactly the same. There's no difference. Another question? No? Any more questions here? In the previous lecture, I recommended that you meditate on death and the process of dying. And I would suggest that's still a useful practice to do, to spend a few minutes during the day in meditation, in reflection, not doing anything else, but closing your eyes and visualizing your own death. And again, not to visualize a car crash or getting cancer or something like that, but to actually visualize the process of dying, how life leaves the body. This is really important. We need to lessen our attachment to this body. And this exercise of consciously observing the process of death in yourself can teach you about the essence, about what your essence is and what it is not. It's very useful. And secondly, I would recommend that you work very hard trying to discover how your essence works and what it is. Put a lot of effort and energy into what is it to be conscious? What is it to be observant? There are many lectures and books about this, specifically Revolutionary Psychology, Revolution of the Dialectic, and The Great Rebellion. These three have all of the tools that you need. And there's a lecture called The Key of SOL, which will also help. It's very important that you grasp what is the essence. Not get caught in the terminology, but to experience the energy of it in your life. And to learn how to work with it constantly. Not just every Saturday, but in every event. This is the training that you need to understand the rest of the lectures I'm going to give. If you're not understanding in your experience what essence is, the rest of the lectures won't make any sense to you. Do you have a question?
I wasn't sure if you're going to do any more lectures. I was going to ask that.
Yeah, there's a few more things about death that I want to talk about. Today I wanted to set up the psychological parameters. In order to understand death and dying and how to die, you need to understand your essence. And you need to understand your ego. And you need to understand your personality. If you're confused about those three, not conceptually, but energetically, in your experience in the moment, then the process of death will be a mystery to you. To really learn how to die cognizantly, you need to learn what the essence is and how to use it. So that in that moment, you are essence, not ego. And not confused by personality. That's how important it is. All of us are going to die. So I'm hoping in these lectures to prepare you for that. I mean, let's look at the people right now who are dealing with death and we're not prepared. There are many. Not just in events around the world. In my personal life, there are several people right now who are facing death. And that's why this topic came up. It was asked of me to teach this. So it is real. Any other question?
How many hours do Gnostics meditate per day?
How many hours do Gnostics meditate per day? Depends on the person. A beginning student will meditate as much as they are interested in learning. We recommend to start trying for 10 to 15 minutes a day, at least, in the evening. Meditate and relax. Some students who have more experience will meditate for an hour or two. A well-trained student will meditate 5 to 6 hours a day. And a very serious student who is fully committed to it will not sleep. They will meditate. Any other questions? By meditation, what I'm referring to is not self-observation, not self-remembering, not walking meditation, not mantra, not any other kind of practice. I'm talking about empty observation of phenomena. No eyes open, the body is not active, the ego is being observed, the personality is not there. It's just consciousness, active and observing and learning. Real meditation. We do a lot of preparatory exercises, pranayamas and mantras and runic practices and many types of things to prepare consciousness or strengthen consciousness. These are not meditation. They are preliminary. Real meditation is something else. It is a state of essence, a state of consciousness that is beyond the body. It is beyond thought. It is beyond emotion. It is beyond any kind of sensation that we know here. It's something else. And really, to understand death, you need that experience of meditation. If you can meditate well, death will be easy. And by meditating well, I mean if you can enter samadhi at will, then if you train yourself to be prepared for it, you can enter death as a samadhi. And then death's not a big deal. All right. Thank you.
The presentation of this lecture was made possible by donations from listeners like you. Help Gnostic Radio to help others. Make a donation by visiting gnosticradio.org. For questions and deeper understanding of this lecture, we invite you to explore the wide variety of resources available on our websites. Thank you for your support. May all beings be happy.
Welcome to the presentation of a lecture from Gnostic Radio, a free public service from the Gnostic tradition of Samael Aun Weor. Gnosis is the root wisdom of all the world's great religions. Gnosis is a universal teaching of practical science, whose goal is absolute liberation from suffering and the complete development of the human being. This lecture is one of hundreds available as free downloads, podcasts, or transcriptions. Our lectures range in topic and complexity in order to address the many needs of humanity. We invite you to browse our library of lectures to find teachings that suit you. Each Saturday, Gnostic Radio broadcasts live and includes a free online classroom allowing listeners to see images, read related scriptures, and ask questions of the speaker. To learn how to participate, visit gnosticradio.org. Gnostic Radio is a service of Glorian Publishing, a non-profit organization. The lectures and radio broadcast have been made possible by the financial support of listeners like you. Most spiritual schools recommend a donation of $10 to $20 per lecture. To make a donation, visit gnosticradio.org. Now, with heartfelt wishes for the end of suffering for all creatures, we begin the lecture. May all beings be happy.